This TOK presentation will talk about the role of emotion on bias and acquisition of knowledge. The real-life situation chosen portrays the story of the police officer Eugene Goodman, who was on duty in the United States Capitol during the riots and the storming on January 6, 2021. Officer Goodman was recognized for being able to distract rioters and stopping them from getting inside the chambers without using deadly force. The officer risked his life for his country and to save the life of others and was able to avoid conflict, even though many other people believe that deadly force should have been used against the attacker. This article demonstrates the opinion of Officer Eugene Goodman and how his choices led to a positive result of protecting the chambers. There were 6 main knowledge concepts that were extracted from this real-life situation. The first knowledge concept was of explanation. The article explains the situation that Officer Goodman was in and how he was able to handle it. It also explains why he chose not to use deadly force and how he was able to distract rioters. The evidence provided inside the article is a video of Officer Goodman distracting rioters and quotes that provide a testimony of people who saw the actions of the officer and how they feel about him distracting rioters instead of using deadly force. The emotions that relate to this knowledge question demonstrate the danger that the officer was in, as all the rioters were going against him. The video shows the anger and violence of the attackers which provoked a feeling of fear in the officer, since he was alone and risking his life. The argument of the real-life situation was whether or not Officer Goodman should have used deadly force. In this case, he didn't, but many people argue that he should have used deadly force since it was disrespecting the Capitol. The article demonstrates only one perspective, which is a perspective of an officer in the Capitol, since it is demonstrated through the use of a video and statements from the officer that demonstrate how he acted and how he controlled the situation as he was being attacked by many rioters. This real-life situation was published by the Guardian, which is a very reliable source. And through the video, it is demonstrated the presence of authority, since many officers and police force was present in the article and in the video. Through these knowledge concepts, we were able to formulate the knowledge question of: in what way can evidence influence people's bias and their acquisition of knowledge? The 3 main terms of the knowledge question is evidence, bias, and acquisition of knowledge. These relate to the real-life situation, as the article provides evidence of the situation and the events that occurred at the White House. The video demonstrates Officer Goodman's attempt to distract rioters, allowing Senate members to be locked inside of the chamber. Also, many quotes were provided that give a testimony of the events and support the actions of Officer Goodman. The use of evidence presented in the article can influence people's bias by providing proof of how the event occurred. It can influence it as a way to provide a unique perspective of the event and support the opinion of the author of the article. The way in which evidence influences people's biases can alter the acquisition of knowledge, since biases create a filter on information perceived by the audience. It can skew the accuracy of their information received and restrict their acquisition of knowledge. This is a video that was provided by the article as evidence of the storming of the Capitol and the riots, in which Officer Goodman distracted the rioters. Apart from that, there was a statement made through a tweet from the Congressman Scott Peters that supports Officer Goodman's actions, and also another tweet that describes the video presented by The Guardian and how the officer distracted the rioters by taking a right instead of a left, leading them the wrong way. There are many ways that the knowledge question proposed can be answered. The first perspective in which this knowledge question can be answered is through the framing effect. This bias was proposed by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman in their paper Prospect Theory of 1979. This bias refers to the influence in people's decisions based on the way information is presented to them, rather than on the facts. Such decisions may be suboptimal, since poor information can be framed in a positive light. This might lead to make less poor information more attractive and objective information less attractive, as they're casted in a less positive light, in a less favorable light. This bias can have a lot of influence on people's opinions and public decisions. The bias occurs as choices influenced by the way people's opinions are framed through different wording, reference points, and emphasis. Evidence can influence people's framing cognitive bias as a way to make them believe information in the way that is presented to them. By utilizing evidence to present information and support it, people are more likely to acquire knowledge depending on the perspective of the evidence provided. However, if an alternate perspective is presented with different evidence, the audience might change their views. For example, as public affairs and other events draw attention from the public, they can be interpreted very differently based on how they are framed. Sometimes positions that benefit the majority of people can be seen unfavorable because they're in a negative lighting, and other positions that do not benefit the public gain more popularity and more attention as they are framed in a positive light. Another perspective to answer the knowledge question is through anchoring bias. This theory was also proposed by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman in their paper from 1974, The Judgment Under Uncertainty, Heuristic, and Bias. This bias causes people to rely heavily on the first piece of information given to them on a certain topic. When people are setting plans or making estimates about something, they can interpret new information based on their anchor instead of using their information objectively. This anchoring bias can prevent acquisition of knowledge, updating predictions, and can skew judgment towards one's anchor. It will place a filter on new information and will distort people's perspective, since they are mainly focused on their anchor. As evidence is provided, people can result in an anchoring bias, since it makes them believe the first piece of information that is presented to them. It makes the first piece of information much more believable. This evidence might result in people limiting in a limitation in people's acquisition of knowledge to one source and one piece of information, even though that information is irrational. And as said before, it can provoke a filter of new information and distort their people's perception. The third theory and the third perspective is the theory of confirmation of bias. The confirmation bias is a tendency to listen more often to information that confirms existing beliefs. Through this bias, people tend to favor information that reinforce the things that they already think or believe. However, if this information goes against their existing beliefs, then people are more likely to reject it and ignore it. People are more likely to process information that supports their own beliefs, especially when it is the information is very important to them or very self-relevant. Evidence can influence people's confirmation bias depending on whether the evidence supports their previous beliefs or not. If it supports their previous beliefs, it might allow them to acquire more information regarding the topic they're interested in. But if the information does not interest them and goes against their belief, then the evidence provided might not help them acquire relevant knowledge in their perspective. This bias is very important because it might lead people to hold stronger beliefs to false information and false perspectives, even though there is evidence that demonstrate the contrary to what they actually believe in. This might cause people to become overconfident in their beliefs as they accumulate evidence that supports their perspective, when in reality there is evidence that goes against their beliefs and is actually overlooked and ignored by them.
Now we will talk about how the article represents the framing effect, anchoring bias, and the confirmation bias. The article providing the story of the attack on the Capitol provides a view that may form or create the cognitive bias of framing effect. When you first take a look at the article, only the information from the side of the cop is presented, which can create a bias since only his perspective is given. Since the information is mostly given in the form that raises Officer Eugene, this may cause a bias because not all sides of the story are being told. This may also relate with the anchoring bias since the first piece of information that is given in the article is a video of the crowd and what is happening from the perspective of the officer. This evidence that they give directly causes people to rely on it since it is the first this that they see, and this directly influences the perspective that they have on the problem and may make some people directly choose the side of the officer right when they see the article. Since the United States has been very divided in the past years, this article directly sides with the people from the Democratic Party since it is going against the Republicans that got into the Capitol. This provides a confirmation bias tendency since it will influence a lot more on people who are against Republicans since this article only further provides evidence to support their beliefs and it shows the side of what they believe, so this shows the confirmation bias more strongly. Now we will be specifically talking about real life situations in which all of these cognitive bias can be seen as well. So the first article that we will be analyzing is one that is called Shark Attack on Cocos Island, Costa Rica. This article talks about the incident that occurred in Cocos Island, Costa Rica on November 2017, which was published by the Costa Rican magazine called Tico Times. What happened in this event is that a foreign tourist came to the famous island in Costa Rica to scuba dive. It is also known as the Shark Island by some people. On the past years, it is also known that the tiger shark has been immigrating into the island, and it's very well known to be aggressive and territorial. But the guides that work there have been accommodated and already know how to handle the shark when it approaches them and to stay calm and what to do if it gets aggressive. What happened was that the tourist's personal diver was not experienced and was not from Costa Rica, and he got into the place of the tiger and the tiger got very aggressive and attacked him. After this, the woman started swimming away and didn't remain calm, and she got attacked by the tiger shark, and she then died at the scene. And this caused a lot of problems in the tourist attraction in Costa Rica. So now we're gonna see how the article uses the framing effect. The article uses the framing effect to shift the view on the dangers of shark attacks. The article focuses on the idea of how bad sharks are and that they are the problem, initially shifting the blame towards one side. This article doesn't give the full explanation on why it really happens and it only puts more pressure and more bad things and a bad image on the sharks. This only further highlights and brings out the idea that sharks are completely dangerous and they will always attack people. Sharks are mostly passive beings and only attack when they feel that they are in danger, but this article uses the opinion of the scientist and the situation to further give an example of the dangers of the shark, using the framing effect to give an opinion. Now we're going to talk about an article that discusses the devastating death of George Floyd. This article talks about what happened in Minneapolis on May 25th, 2020. What happened was that George Floyd was being arrested, and while being detained, a police officer placed his knee on his neck for 8 minutes. After being brutally assaulted, George Floyd died on the scene, causing a series of riots and protests all over the United States for months. And this caused a lot of problems because of the devastating images in the video, as the image that you can see. The article provides a video that shows the brutal force used by the police officer who stepped on his neck, which then led to his neck. And the article, throughout the whole article, we see that how they explain the situation and they talk about the importance and all the bad things that happened that led to this confrontation. So, on this article about George Floyd's death, we can clearly see the use of the anchoring effect. The article starts with the full video of the assault, which brings the attention of the people because this is a very graphical video and you see what is happening in the scene. You see him scream and you see the other officers just watching. So it's like very devastating and just grabs your attention towards and even towards one side. This provides a video but no direct explanation for the cause of the incident. So here we see how they're shifting towards the video and the importance of the video. And the article focuses mainly on the evidence of the assault to anchor the viewers and to make them hate the police officers that did this. But it doesn't give a full view. It focuses mainly on creating anger with the video and using this to draw people's attention from the rest of the information that it follows in the article. And this causes people to follow only one piece of evidence, which is the anchoring effect, where people only focus on the first thing that they see or the first thing that attracts this attention, which here is the video, and this gives a lot of importance to the article and where to back up and what they talk about in the future. Like you see what they're going to talk about in the article. The third and final article that we will be discussing is one that talks about the death of a 14-year-old from alcohol poisoning. This event happened on July 14th, 2011, and it talks about the death of a 14-year-old named Takemi Rao. What happened was that Takemi and her friends were having a slumber party that turned into a drinking night at 2 a.m. The kids started drinking soda mixed with vodka, which got them highly intoxicated. And since they're kids, this is a very bad thing for them because they can't tolerate alcohol as adults. Uh, the mother found her daughter's friends passed out in the morning and vomiting, and she thought that they were sick or something. But then she went to the room and found Takemi passed out on her bed, and then she called the paramedics. And when the paramedics arrived, they saw that they pronounced her dead at the scene, and it's most likely to be from alcohol poisoning. So this highlights the importance of how bad alcohol is, and even for children, and like people don't take it seriously, but actually even a 14-year-old girl died from alcohol poisoning. So it highlights how bad alcohol can be for children and even adults. So the article from the death of alcohol poisoning of an underage teenage girl uses the confirmational bias. It uses evidence to prove the negative effects from alcohol consumptions from children to even adults. So it just further proves the idea, and it gives evidence about how bad alcohol can be for human beings. It promotes the claim that underage drinking is bad and triggers a person's confirmation bias. So a person that believes this will be triggered and will even believe it more now that he has more evidence. Adults who do not support underage drinking will acknowledge also the information, helping them acquire their knowledge to confirm their belief that kids should not be drinking. This will only further make them fear and make them more biased or the idea that kids should not be drinking because of the negative effects and they could even die. And here's an example of that. Also, it gives the confirmation bias because people who support it will support it even more, but people who support underage drinking will reject this article or even ignore it because it doesn't help them in any form or way. Just tells them something that they don't want to know, or they know but they don't even care. To conclude, I want to reinstate our initial knowledge question, which was, in what ways does evidence influence people's bias and their acquisition of knowledge? Bias is one of the biggest factors when it comes to decision making and reasoning behind people's decisions. When looking at a factor like evidence, this is something that most people rely on because it gives them a more concrete reason to believe in something. It makes people trust an idea or concept much more, but evidence can also be confusing and can create a bias. Sometimes people use evidence to manipulate other people's bias by just presenting evidence that supports their claims, making them the evidence look in a way that it helps them with what they want to say to other people. When we look at the cognitive bias of the framing effect, it is visible how the way evidence is presented can influence a bias and make people believe in something without really understanding other perspectives. Here we see how important this knowledge question is, since it demonstrates how dangerous evidence can be when it is manipulated. Sometimes the way evidence is presented can influence your acquisition of knowledge, as seen with the confirmation bias. If the evidence given supports someone's beliefs, this will create a stronger bias influencing their acquisition of knowledge, because now the reader will be much more interested in the article, and will pay much more attention. Overall, when it comes to bias, it is very important to understand that the things that can create a bias, like evidence, because by understanding how these things can be manipulated, um, people can become more conscious of the problem and will now pay more attention on how ideas are presented to them. Nowadays, with the internet and fake news, people are getting easily manipulating into believing an idea even when they don't even understand something. And this affects their acquisition of knowledge because they're not getting the full picture. So, by answering the knowledge question, we get a wider view on the implications of evidence and how the bias created by it can affect your acquisition of knowledge. Thank you very much. Now we will present the references that we used throughout the whole presentation. Thank you very much.